Today's victim, I got a 2016 Chevy Cruze with a check engine light on and a P1101 code. I knew this day was coming. I knew the day was coming that I was going to make a video on this code, because this code is a beach. It's a real beach to diagnose because it could go so many different ways. So we've got the P1101 code stored. This ignition passed and last test passed, but that does not necessarily mean that that's true and that we don't have a problem. Let's take a look at some engine data with the engine at idle to see what's going on. So let's take a look at some induction data. I've got the engine idling right now. Right away, I see that baro looks good. That's about the normal range for this area. And right away I see the map sensor is about where they normally run, 5 or 6 psi at idle. But I see a big problem here, is that the mass airflow sensor is reading a little bit higher than calculated airflow, and that it would be the reason why we are setting a P1101 code. The P1101 code means that theoretically, the engine should breathe this much air per cycle, and we are measuring something different than mathematically we should. So it means that this mass air sensor is lying for some reason. We need to find out why. Taking a look underneath the hood, gonna make sure all the ducts are tight, make sure there's no missing sealed air, tight, no air leaks, anything. Check for anything obvious, which I did, and I didn't find anything obvious, so we're gonna move on. I'm gonna check crankcase pressure because I might want to know if the piston rings are leaking, or I've got a broken piston, or maybe I've got a ruptured TCV diaphragm and I've got a suction and I've got air leakage through this valve cover. So I might want to look into that. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the crankcase hole there and then look at the gauge. Gauge is just fine, so that's not the problem. We don't have leaky pistons, leaky piston rings, or a PCV problem. We've got something else going on. So I went ahead and added some fuel trim data to go along with this. Notice we are deducting about 20 to 22% fuel, and that would be because the mass airflow sensor is reading higher than it should, and therefore our airflow sample is higher than it should. So the math equation of air to fuel is off. And what's happening is that the oxygen sensor is picking that up and it's making that correction in the form of the fuel trim. So what I'm gonna do to find out whether that mass airflow sensor is lying or not, after I've already tested the ducts, I'm gonna disconnect that mass air sensor. If the fuel trim goes to normal, I know that I cannot trust the mass air sensor and it's lying for some reason. So again, I've already checked the ducts for any leaks. I've already checked for crankcase leaks, anything like that. I'm gonna disconnect that mass air sensor and just see what happens. First off, the engine didn't like it very much, but let's see what the fuel trims did. Right away, after disconnecting the mass airflow sensor, the fuel trim is correcting back towards 0%, which tells me that the mass air sensor is not accurate. If the fuel trim does hover around 0%, maybe plus or minus 10%, either way, that means that the induction system is otherwise okay, such as vacuum leaks, air leaks, etc. So right away, seeing this, I know my problem is most likely in the mass airflow sensor or the dirty air filter or something like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. What did I forget back here? No, it's just hanging up. Okay. Usually this style of air filter is incorrectly installed, and that will cause you some mass air sensor problems. It does appear to be installed correctly, but I might need to take a close look at that. You know, at first glance, it looks like it's installed correctly, but look at that. Look at that. It's not even on the tube. So this not being properly installed causes turbulence going in to the mass airflow sensor and causes it to read inaccurately. So what I'm going to do about it, I'm going to do a quick rinse, clean out that sensor, and probably going to replace this filter. I may just throw it on there and see what happens. So check it out. I tried to install this thing properly, but it's a cheapo aftermarket filter and it just does not fit right. So I'm going to replace this with a factory filter and we're going to fix this car. Here's the cheapo aftermarket filter. Look at that, deformed. You can tell it was incorrectly installed for quite a while. This is the GM factory filter. Buy once, cry once. We're going to install that properly, put it all back together. Okay, got that all put back together. Now we're going to start it up to see what kind of difference did that make. Before I clear codes, before I reset anything, let's see what happens. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start it up. Right away. Mass airflow sensor is a lot closer to calculated, isn't it? Fuel trims are looking good. We may have fixed this one. Your calculated and your mass air sensor won't always read exactly the same. We may still have something going on, but I think we're a lot better than we were. You could also have that mass airflow sensor was permanently damaged from contamination of breathing dirty air, essentially. So I may have to change that sensor itself. Let's take a look. P1101, last test passed, this ignition passed. Remember, that doesn't always mean that's true, but it's always nice that it tells us, yes, it has passed in this ignition cycle with the engine running. So now that things have stabilized, it looks like we are within 0.3 of a gram per second of actual. So I think I can let that go. I could recommend to replace the mass air sensor also. I think it'll be okay though. Okay, so I let this run for quite a while and the code never did fail again. I never did have a problem. It's definitely running a lot better. So in summary, the P1101 code has to do with the fact that theoretically, by the math equation, that engine should breathe a certain amount of air in per revolution, per cycle, versus what the mass airflow sensor is actually measuring. There is a difference between what the sensor has measured and what theoretically should have happened. That's when you will get the P1101 code. So today it was an easy fix because it was a mass air sensor reading inaccurately, and I found it right away, right directly to the problem, because I knew what to look for in the data and what to check. I checked that there was no leaks. I checked that there was no PCB system leak, because for the P1101 code, I have replaced valve covers for a PCB problem. I have replaced pistons for a broken piston or maybe a bad ring. Anything that causes the engine to breathe more or less air than theoretically it should will cause a P1101 code. So today it was easy. It's not always that way. I might make another P1101 code video if that happens.